The first crack in her confidence came the moment she saw the flicker of judgment cross his face. So quick yet so sharp that it felt like a hand closing around her throat. And in that instant she wondered how many times a heart could be broken before it forgot how to protect itself. Margaret had dressed carefully that evening, not to impress but to feel normal again. To feel like the woman she used to be before grief rearranged her life into something quieter and heavier. As she sat across the small table in a softly lit restaurant in Ohio, the air thick with polite expectations, she asked herself a question that lingered like a bruise. What if this were you, stepping back into the world after loss, hoping not for perfection but for respect, and realizing too late that hope can still betray you? Margaret had not planned to go on the blind date at all. It had taken months of gentle nudging from her friend Patricia, countless reassurances that life did not end when love was buried, and one particularly lonely Sunday afternoon when the house felt too big and too silent. She was 42, a widow for 3 years, and still learning how to exist without Thomas, the man who had known her in every season of her life. Grief had taught her discipline, routine, and endurance, but it had also taught her fear, especially the fear of being seen as damaged. Sitting there that night, hands folded tightly in her lap, she could feel the weight of that fear pressing against her ribs as the man across from her, Robert, leaned back with an expression that seemed more curious than kind. The conversation had started politely enough, drifting through safe topics like work and weather, but something shifted when the truth surfaced, as truths always do. Margaret had mentioned Thomas naturally, not dramatically, because his absence was part of her reality, not a performance. She had not expected sympathy or reverence, only understanding. Instead, she watched Robert's posture change, his interest dull, as if he were calculating something unpleasant. The silence that followed felt louder than any insult, and when he finally spoke, his reaction carried a coldness that settled deep into her chest. In that moment, Margaret felt smaller, as though widowhood had shrunk her worth in his eyes, and she wondered how many people walking this earth carry invisible labels that others use to judge them without mercy. Her confidence did not shatter all at once, it splintered quietly. She replayed his words in her mind, each one sharp with implication, suggesting that her past made her less desirable, less whole, less capable of offering something uncomplicated. It wasn't anger that flooded her first, but shame, a shame she hadn't felt since the early days after the funeral, when strangers spoke to her in hushed tones and acquaintances avoided her gaze. Sitting there, she felt as though she had failed some unspoken test, as if surviving loss had somehow disqualified her from love. If you were in her place, would you have stood up and walked away? Or would you, like Margaret, have stayed rooted, hoping dignity could survive humiliation? When the date ended, Margaret stepped into the cool night air feeling hollowed out. The streetlights blurred as tears threatened, but she held them back, refusing to let one careless man undo years of healing. Still, the damage was real. She drove home in silence, the radio off, the memory of Thomas flooding her thoughts. He had loved her resilience, had always said her strength came from kindness, not defiance. That night, she sat alone on the edge of her bed, the same place she had sat countless times before, and allowed herself to feel the ache she pretended was gone. Widowhood, she realized, was not just the loss of a partner, but the repeated task of defending your humanity to those who saw only your tragedy. Days passed, and the encounter lingered like a shadow. At work in a small community library, Margaret found herself distracted, staring at book spines without reading titles. She questioned whether she had been foolish to try again, whether opening her heart had been a mistake. Yet beneath the doubt, something else stirred, a quiet defiance that surprised her. She remembered the years she had spent caregiving during Thomas's illness, the strength it took to smile through exhaustion, the courage required to rebuild life afterward. That strength had not vanished because one man failed to recognize it. Slowly, Margaret began to understand that his disrespect was not a reflection of her worth, but of his limitations. The turning point came unexpectedly on a rainy afternoon when she volunteered at a grief support group hosted in a church basement. She hadn't planned to speak, but as she listened to others share their stories, she felt compelled to open her heart. Without recounting every detail, she spoke of feeling judged, of carrying loss like a visible scar. As she looked around the circle, she saw nods, tears, and understanding eyes. In that room, surrounded by strangers bound by shared pain, Margaret felt something mend inside her. She realized she was not alone, and more importantly, she was not broken. Among the volunteers was Samuel, a quiet man with gentle eyes who listened more than he spoke. Their connection grew slowly, built on mutual respect and patience rather than expectation. He never rushed her story or minimized her past. In his presence, Margaret felt seen not as a widow, but as a woman with depth, history, and courage. Through simple acts of kindness and shared moments of silence, her confidence began to rebuild itself, piece by piece. She learned that healing did not mean erasing the past, but honoring it without letting it define her future. Margaret never saw Robert again, but she stopped replaying his words. Instead, she reframed that night as a lesson rather than a wound. She learned that not every door that closes is a loss. Some are protection. The blind date that once shattered her confidence ultimately became a mirror, reflecting both her vulnerability and her strength. She emerged from that experience more compassionate toward herself, more discerning, and more aware of the quiet power she carried. Just before the story closes, pause for a moment and ask yourself this. Have you ever judged someone by their pain, or felt diminished by your own? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your reflection might be the comfort someone else needs today. In the end, Margaret understood that love, when it comes again, would not ask her to forget who she had, but would honor every chapter of her life. And if this story touched your heart, reminded you of kindness, regret, or the power of second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe so more hearts can be reached with stories that matter.